Some creatures never ask for permission to enter a story. They simply appear. A shadow between the trees, a pair of eyes, waiting beyond the firelight, footprints that begin as a man and end as something no hunter could explain. You won't find just one werewolf. You will find hundreds. Some are covered in thick black fur, said to vanish into the forest until the moon finds them. Some stand tall enough to meet a man's eyes without ever leaving four legs behind. Some remember every face they ever loved. Others remember only the taste of blood and the path that led them home before sunrise. Some are born beneath the curse, some inherit it, some are bidden, and some spend their entire lives praying. They never hear the howl that changes everything. So tonight, don't think of this as another legend. Think of it as the moment you step beyond the tree line. Every broken branch, every distant howl, and every pair of glowing eyes. Welcome to the world of werewolves. What exactly is a werewolf? It sounds like such a simple question. A man and a wolf, existing within the same body. But the deeper you step into old folklore, the more that answer begins to fall apart. There was never just one werewolf. There never was. Some were said to stand well over 2 meters tall, with broad shoulders, thick black fur, and claws powerful enough to tear through wood as though it were little more than bark. Others were described as almost impossible to distinguish from an ordinary wolf. Larger perhaps, smarter, watching for just a moment too long. Some walked on 4 legs, others stood upright like men. Some could move between both without effort, and then there were the eyes. Perhaps no part of the werewolf has been described more often, or remembered more clearly. Golden eyes were said to belong to those born beneath the curse. Amber eyes appeared again and again throughout European folklore, glowing beneath the full moon like embers hidden beneath ash. Some stories even claim that a werewolf's eyes reflected light long before the rest of its body emerged from the darkness, becoming the first and sometimes the only part of the creature anyone ever saw. The fur changed with every region, black, gray, brown, white in the mountains, almost silver beneath winter moonlight. Some legends insisted the fur wasn't ordinary at all, but coarse enough to turn aside blades, and thick enough to disappear into the forest itself. But no matter how different these stories became, one detail remained remarkably consistent. People almost never described a werewolf as behaving like a wild animal. It didn't wander without purpose, it didn't kill without reason. It watched, it chose, it remembered. And perhaps that's what separates the werewolf from almost every other creature in folklore. A vampire leaves its humanity behind. A ghost leaves its life behind. But a werewolf is forced to carry both. A human mind, trapped inside the instincts of something far older, or perhaps a beast that simply borrowed a human life for a little while. And that raises a far more interesting question. If a werewolf isn't truly born a beast, then how does a human being become one? If there is one thing almost every tradition agrees on, it's this. A werewolf was never simply a larger wolf. It was stronger, faster, and smarter. According to old folklore, a werewolf could hear footsteps long before a traveler reached the edge of the forest. It could follow a scent carried by the wind over impossible distances. Some believed it could hear a heartbeat through the silence of the trees. Others claimed no matter how carefully you covered your tracks, a werewolf already knew where you were going. Its strength became almost legendary. Entire doors were set to splinter beneath a single blow. Horses refused to ride deeper into certain forests. Dogs fell silent. Even wolves were believed to give way when one passed through their territory. And unlike ordinary predators, the werewolf was never described as hunting out of desperation. It hunted because it could. Because something ancient inside it demanded the chase. Many stories even claimed a werewolf would stalk its prey long before attacking, watching, learning, and waiting. Not because it needed to, but because it wanted to know exactly who or what it was hunting. Perhaps that's why so many old accounts describe the same feeling. The feeling of being watched, not by an animal, but by something, patient enough to wait until you finally noticed it, and once you did, according to those stories, it was already too late to pretend you were alone. Yet for all its strength, all its speed, and all the fear surrounding it, people remained fascinated by one question more than any other. Not how powerful the beast was, but where it came from, because no one is born fearing silver. No one is born looking toward the full moon. Something has to happen first. The first path into the curse is, without question, the most familiar, the bite. Ask almost anyone today how a werewolf is created, and this is probably the answer you'll hear first. A single bite, a single night, a single full moon, and a human life is changed forever. But what many people don't realize is that this version of the legend is actually far younger than most of the werewolf stories themselves. In many of the oldest European traditions, a bite alone was not always enough. Some stories insisted the victim had to survive the attack without receiving any blessing or sacred protection before sunrise. Others believed the curse could only be passed if the bite drew blood beneath the light of the full moon. A few even claimed that only the saliva of the beast carried the curse, while an ordinary wound, made by its claws, would leave nothing more than scars. The detail changed from village to village, but the idea remained remarkably consistent. Something passed from the beast into the human. According to old folklore, the first sign was rarely physical. The body did not immediately twist into fur and claws. Instead, the change began quietly. Many legends speak of an overwhelming fever that no healer could explain. Victims complained of burning skin even during the coldest nights. Food began to lose its taste. Ordinary sounds became painfully loud. The smell of smoke, wet earth, fresh blood, or rain drifting through the trees seemed almost impossible to ignore. Some accounts describe an unbearable restlessness. Sleep became difficult. The victim wandered at night without understanding why. Again and again they dreamed of the same place, a forest they had never visited, a path they did not recognize, a moon that somehow felt familiar. As the days passed, the senses continued to sharpen. Dogs reacted strangely. Horses refused to come close. In several German and Slavic traditions, it was believed that household animals could recognize the curse long before another human ever could. A loyal hunting dog might suddenly growl at its own master. Cattle would become agitated. Horses would refuse to allow the cursed person into the stable. Then came the first full moon. Curiously, not every legend describes the transformation as immediate. Some insist the victim fought it for hours, desperately trying to remain inside their home. Others claim the curse was impossible to resist. The closer the moon climbed, the more overwhelming the instinct became, not simply to run but to leave civilization behind and disappear into the wilderness. That detail appears again and again throughout European folklore. The forest, rarely a field, rarely a village, almost always the forest. As though whatever awakened inside the victim instinctively knew where it belonged. Whether these stories were born from fear, misunderstanding, or something far older is impossible to say, but they reveal something fascinating about the way people imagined lycanthropy. The bite was never just an injury. It was an invitation, not to death, but to another way of existing. To become stronger, to hear farther, to run faster, to leave behind the limits of being human. And perhaps that is why the legend endured for so many generations. Because hidden beneath the fear, there was always another question. If such power truly existed, would everyone have tried to escape it? But not every legend begins with a bite. Long before stories of infected wounds and cursed blood became widespread, many believed a werewolf wasn't created at all. It was born. Across large parts of Europe, particularly in Slavic, Germanic, and Baltic folklore, lycanthropy was often described as something that ran through a family rather than something caught from a monster. The curse could sleep for generations. A grandfather might live an ordinary life. So might his son. Then, without a warning, a child would be born carrying something neither of them had ever shown. Some legends claim the first transformation came during adolescence, when the body began to change on its own. Others insisted the curse remained hidden until the first full moon after a certain age. And in a few traditions, no one, not even the child, knew the curse existed until the morning after the very first transformation. Imagine waking to torn clothing, mud beneath your feet, leaves caught in your hair, your body exhausted for reasons you couldn't explain. In many of these stories, the werewolf remembered almost nothing. Only fragments, the smell of rain, the sound of distant rivers, the feeling of running without ever growing tired. Then there were the families themselves. Some accepted the curse in silence. Children were warned never to leave the house during certain nights of the year. Windows were barred before sunset. Chains, according to a handful of local traditions, were hidden inside homes not to imprison strangers, but to protect someone the family loved. Other stories tell of parents desperately searching for signs that the curse had passed over their children. An unusual fascination with wolves, an instinctive ability to find their way through forests, dogs behaving strangely around them, or an unsettling calm whenever the moon was full. Whether any of these signs meant anything was never certain. Folklore rarely offers certainty, it offers patterns. And one pattern appears again and again. The beast was never treated as stranger. It belonged to the family long before anyone realized it was there. That belief changed the legend completely. Because if the curse could be inherited, then somewhere, someone was already waiting for the moon, without even knowing why. Not every werewolf feared the curse. Some searched for it. That may sound strange today, but according to centuries of European folklore, there were those who believed becoming a werewolf was not a punishment, it was power, it was freedom. It was strength beyond anything that a human body could ever possess. And because of that, people began searching for ways to become one. One of the oldest beliefs tells of the wolfskin, not an ordinary pelt, but the hide of a wolf believed to carry the spirit of the beast itself. Across parts of northern and eastern Europe, stories speak of enchanted wolfskins worn beneath the full moon. The moment the skin touched the body, the transformation began. Some legends claim the person disappeared beneath the fur entirely. Others believe the wolfskin did not change the body, only awakened something that had always been sleeping inside it. Removing the skin was said to restore the human form. But not every story offered that mercy. Some warned that if the wolfskin remained on for too long, the transformation could become permanent. Others claimed the skin had to be removed by another person. A werewolf could not free itself, and if no one came, the beast remained. In other traditions, the wolfskin became something even smaller. A belt, sometimes described as a strip of enchanted wolf hide, sometimes woven from the fur of several wolves, and in a handful of legends, said to have been given by a witch or by the devil himself. People believed fastening the belt around the waist was enough to call the beast. No bite, no inherited curse, only a ritual and a choice. But perhaps the most fascinating stories were the ones surrounding magical ointments. Throughout medieval Europe, records mention strange salves prepared by those believed to practice witchcraft. Their exact ingredients changed from place to place. Some called for animal fat, others spoke of poisonous herbs gathered beneath the full moon. Belladonna, henbane, wolfsbane, hemlock. Plants feared as much as they were respected. The ointment was rubbed onto the arms, the chest, on the forehead, before stepping beneath the moonlight. According to those legends, the change did not happen because of the ointment alone. The ointment prepared the body, the moon awakened the beast. There were darker stories too. Stories of forgotten rituals performed deep within the forest, far from churches and villages. Circles of standing stones, ancient words spoken aloud, offerings left at the roots of old trees. Whether these rituals were meant to summon a spirit, make a bargain, or simply prove devotion to the beast, the stories never truly agree, but they all return to the same idea. Not every werewolf was created against their will. Some crossed that threshold willingly, not because they wished to become monsters, but because they believed the beast offered something humanity never could: strength, freedom, the ability to outrun fear itself. And perhaps that is the most dangerous idea any werewolf legend has ever whispered: that the greatest temptation was never surviving the curse, it was choosing it. And then came the night every legend seemed to remember: the transformation. No two stories described it exactly the same way. Some claimed it happened in seconds, others believed it lasted for hours. But almost every tradition agrees on one thing: no one ever described it as painless. According to old folklore, the change rarely began with the body. It began with a feeling, an overwhelming restlessness, an urge to leave, to step outside, to walk away from the warmth of the fire and toward the trees. Many stories describe an almost impossible pull toward the wilderness. The forest no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt like home. Then came the senses. The air itself seemed to change. Scents became sharper. The smell of rain carried for miles, fresh earth, pine, smoke drifting from distant chimneys. Every scent separated itself from the next, until the world no longer smelled like one place, but thousands. Hearing changed as well, the rustling of leaves, branches bending beneath unseen footsteps, the distant call of an owl, the heartbeat of frightened prey. Legends often describe the world becoming unbearably loud, as though every sound had been waiting to be heard all along. Only then did the body begin to follow. Some accounts speak of muscles tightening until movement became almost impossible. Others describe violent trembling as though every bone struggled to find a new place beneath the skin. Hands were set to lengthen, fingers curled, nails hardened into claws, the jaws stretched forward. Teeth became sharper with each breath, hair darkened, then spread across the arms, the shoulders, the chest, the face, not all at once, slowly, relentlessly, as though something hidden beneath the skin had finally decided to reveal itself. But perhaps the most fascinating question was never what happened to the body, it was what happened to the mind. Some legends insist the human mind disappeared completely. Once the transformation was complete, nothing remained but instinct, the hunt, the scent, the moon. Others tell a very different story. They believed the human mind never left, it watched, unable to speak, unable to stop the beast, forced to witness every step, every hunt, every sunrise. There are even traditions that describe the werewolf remembering everything after returning to human form. Not as scattered dreams, but as perfect memories, the sound of every branch beneath its paws, the path it chose through the forest, the faces of everyone it encountered. Imagine carrying memories like that, while looking completely human by the morning. Perhaps that is why so many werewolf legends are filled with tragedy rather than horror. The greatest fear was never becoming a beast, it was waking up the next morning and remembering. If the transformation ended, life did not. Because according to folklore, a werewolf was never simply a beast wandering through the wilderness. It still belonged to two worlds, the forest and mankind. Some legends claim a werewolf spent every full moon hunting before quietly returning to ordinary life at sunrise. A farmer, a blacksmith, a shepherd, a hunter, a husband, a mother. By daylight, there was nothing remarkable about them. That was perhaps the most unsettling part of all. They could stand beside you, speak with you, share your table, and according to many old traditions, you would never know, unless you knew what to look for. Throughout Europe, people believed a werewolf always left something behind. Not proof, a clue. Some claim the eyebrows met in the middle, forming a single dark line across the forehead. Others believed the palms were covered in coarse hair, hidden from anyone who never thought to look. In parts of Germany and France, old tales insisted that wounds suffered in wolf form would still be present after the transformation ended. A slash across the shoulder, a torn ear, a scar no one could explain. Some believed the eyes never truly changed back. Even in human form, they reflected the light strangely after sunset. Others said the gaze itself was enough. A werewolf, they claimed, never looked at people the way people looked at each other. It watched, as though measuring distance, listening to breathing, following movement instead of conversation. Dogs appear again and again in these stories, more than almost any other animal. Many traditions believed a dog would immediately recognize the beast no matter what human face it wore. Some would bark uncontrollably. Others would lower themselves to the ground and refuse to move. A few stories even claim dogs would whimper and hide without making a sound. Horses were said to be no different. They became restless. They refused familiar paths. And some legends insist they would not allow a hidden werewolf to ride them at all. But despite all these signs, people never stopped asking the same question. Could a werewolf still love? Folklore offers no single answer. Some stories describe men and women who returned home before dawn, embracing their families without ever revealing the truth. Others tell of people who isolated themselves from everyone they loved, terrified that one night they would fail to resist the call of the forest. There are even legends of marriages that lasted for decades, while only one person carried the curse. Imagine living with someone, sharing every ordinary day together, while secretly counting the nights until the next full moon, knowing that when it arrived, you would disappear before sunset and return only after the morning light. Not because you wanted to leave, because something older than choice was calling you home. Once the beast had awakened, another question followed. What did it hunger for? If you ask modern films, the answer is simple: blood. But the folklore was rarely that simple. According to the oldest accounts, a werewolf hunted much like a wolf, but with one terrifying difference. It possessed the mind of something that understood people. It knew where shepherds led their flocks. It knew which paths children took home. It knew which doors were weak and which families lived too far from their neighbors to be heard. Many old European legends describe livestock disappearing long before people did. Sheep were found scattered across hillsides. Goats vanished from their pens. Oxen, animals large enough to frighten ordinary wolves, were discovered torn apart in ways villagers struggled to explain. And when the attacks continued, people began asking a different question. What if this wasn't a wolf at all? In French folklore, there are stories of creatures that seem to ignore the easiest prey. Rather than attacking the nearest animal, they waited, watching, learning the habits of an entire village before striking. German traditions sometimes describe a werewolf following the same family for weeks, appearing only as a shadow between the trees, never close enough to prove it had truly been seen. In parts of Eastern Europe, people believed the beast could recognize every scent carried by the wind. Fear, smoke, fresh bread, rain, a wounded animal, even a familiar person. Some stories claim that once a werewolf caught your scent, it could follow it across rivers, through forests, and over mountains. Whether that was meant literally or simply reflected how impossible it felt to escape, the stories never say. Another detail appears again and again. The hunt was rarely described as frantic. The werewolf did not chase because it had to. It stalked, it circled, it waited. Many legends describe nights where nothing happened at all. No howl, no attack, no sign of the beast. Only the strange feeling that something unseen had passed through the forest and chosen not to reveal itself. That silence frightened people almost as much as the hunt itself, because a creature that can wait can choose. And if it can choose, it can choose you. Curiously, not every tradition believed a werewolf hunted humans. Some stories insist they avoided people whenever possible, feeding instead on deer, wild boar, elk, or livestock. Others claim the curse grew stronger each time human blood was spilled, until the beast could no longer be satisfied by anything else. And there are darker legends still, stories in which the werewolf developed a taste for organs rather than flesh. The heart, the liver, the lungs. These tales appear in several regions of Europe, though never consistently enough to become a universal belief. Perhaps that inconsistency tells us something important. There was never one werewolf. There were hundreds of them. Each village imagined the beast differently. Each forest gave it a different face. Each generation added another page to the story. Yet no matter how much the legends changed, they all preserved the same image, not of an ordinary predator, but of something intelligent enough to make every journey through the woods feel like it was being watched. If there's one symbol forever tied to the werewolf, it is the full moon. Even today, the moment most people picture a werewolf, they picture moonlight, a lone howl, and a transformation that cannot be stopped. But surprisingly, the oldest legends don't always agree. In fact, many of the earliest stories never mention the full moon at all. In several ancient traditions, the moon was never the cause of transformation. It was simply the moment when the beast was strongest. Others believed the moon did nothing more than reveal what daylight allowed a person to hide. The curse already existed. The moon merely uncovered it. As the legend spread across Europe, however, the full moon became impossible to separate from the creature itself. People began watching the skies. Calendars were marked. Doors were barred before sunset. Travel was postponed. Children were called home earlier than usual. Not because anyone knew a werewolf would appear, but because no one wanted to discover they had been right. Some traditions believed the curse answered every full moon without exception. Others claimed only certain moons held that power. The harvest moon, the hunter's moon, the first full moon after the winter solstice. In a handful of regional tales, the transformation could happen on any night, if the curse had grown strong enough. The moon was no longer a trigger, it was a companion. There are even stories in which the werewolf looked toward the moon, not because it needed to, but because something inside it remembered. Remembered the first night, the first hunt. The first time the forest felt more like a home than the village ever had. Perhaps that is why so many old illustrations show the beast looking upward, not in celebration, not in rage, almost in recognition. And that raises another question. If the moon was only part of the legend, what happened when the dawn finally came? Did the beast simply disappear? Or did the human return carrying every memory of the night before? Dawn was never the end of the story. It was the beginning of another one. Because according to folklore, the greatest mystery was never what happened beneath the moon. It was what happened after sunrise. The transformation had ended. The fur was gone. The clothes had disappeared. The beast had fallen silent. But the human remained. Old legends rarely agree on what that morning looked like. Some believe the werewolf remembered nothing. The night simply vanished. Hours disappeared without explanation, leaving behind only torn clothing, aching muscles, mud-stained feet, and an exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. Others believed fragments remained, the sound of rushing water, the smell of pine, a flash of yellow ice in a river, the feeling of running without ever reaching the end of the forest. These memories came like dreams, impossible to hold on to, impossible to forget. But there's another tradition, one that is perhaps even more tragic. According to many medieval accounts, the werewolf remembered everything, every step, every scent, every choice. It remembered the hunt. It remembered the fear. It remembered every face. Imagine carrying on those memories while living an ordinary life. Imagine sitting beside your family at breakfast, knowing exactly where you had been only a few hours before. Imagine looking into the eyes of someone you love, wondering if they had unknowingly crossed your path during the night. Many legends say this was the true curse. Not the claws, not the fangs, not the transformation itself, the memory, because memory leaves no wound that anyone else can see. It cannot be hidden beneath clothing, it cannot be washed away. It follows you into every conversation, every meal, every quiet moment. Some stories even claim that certain werewolves chose to isolate themselves from the people they loved, not because they feared becoming monsters, but because they feared remembering the moment they failed to protect them. And perhaps that is why the werewolf has always occupied such a strange place in folklore. It is not simply a creature of the forest, it is a creature of conflict. Half instinct, half reason, half wilderness, half home, always belonging to both worlds, yet never fully accepted by either. That is what makes the legend endure. Not the transformation, but the question it leaves behind. If you knew that one night could change who you were forever, would you spend your life resisting the beast, or listening for its call? If people believed werewolves could be created, they also believed they could be stopped, but even that was never simple. Every village had its own answer, every forest its own rules. Today almost everyone knows the story of the silver bullet. It has become so closely tied to the werewolf that many believe it has always been part of the legend. But it hasn't. In fact, many of the oldest werewolf traditions never mention silver at all. For centuries, people searched for other ways. Some believed the curse could be broken by calling the werewolf by its baptismal name. Not the name the village knew, but the name spoken over the child on the day they entered the world. Others believed recognition itself carried power. If the beast looked into the eyes of someone it truly loved, someone who refused to see a monster, the human beneath the fur could return, if only for a moment. There are stories in which a wife embraced the beast instead of running, stories in which a mother recognized her own son by the sound of his voice, stories in which a single tear was said to accomplish what no weapon could. Whether those stories were born from faith, hope, or grief, no one can truly say. Then there were those who placed their trust in the natural world. Across parts of Europe, a single plant appears again and again. Wolfsbane. Its very name tied it forever to the creature. Some carried it woven into necklaces, some hung it above their doors. Others planted it around the edges of their homes, believing the beast would never willingly cross it. Whether the plant truly possessed such power, or whether people simply needed something to believe in, the legends never agree. Faith itself often became a weapon. Holy water, blessings, the sign of the cross, sacred relics. In deeply Christian regions, many believed lycanthropy was more than a curse. It was a spiritual corruption, something that could be resisted, not only with steel but with prayer. And then there was silver. Unlike iron, which appears throughout countless European legends, silver arrived much later in many werewolf traditions. Yet once it entered the story, it never truly left. Why silver? No one agrees. Some believed it represented purity. Others connected it to the moon itself, a metal untouched by corruption, a reminder that even the oldest curse could meet something older than itself. Perhaps that is why silver endured. Not because everyone believed it worked, but because everyone wanted to believe there was something, anything that could stand against the beast. Because every legend eventually reaches the same moment. The footprints stop, the forest falls silent, and someone must decide whether to follow. there is one final detail, one that appears again and again, no matter where the story is told. The werewolf is almost never alone, but because it travels with others, but because no legend exists without witnesses. Someone always survived. A hunter who swore he watched a wolf stand upright before disappearing into the trees. A shepherd who refused to return to the same valley after sunset. A traveler who claimed he heard footsteps following him for miles, only to discover there was never anyone behind him. Again and again, the stories begin the same way, not with the beast, with the person who claimed to have seen it. Perhaps that is why the werewolf has never truly faded from folklore. Not because every story was believed, but because every generation left behind someone who insisted they weren't telling a story at all. They were describing a memory, a face they could never forget, a pair of eyes they hoped never to see again. And perhaps that is what makes the werewolf so different from every other legendary creature. A dragon lives in distant mountains. A sea serpent waits beneath impossible waters. But the werewolf was always believed to walk the same roads as everyone else, to drink from the same rivers, to stand in the same churches, to smile with the same human face, until nightfall. And maybe that's the reason the legend survived, because it never asked us to fear the wilderness. It asked us something far more difficult. What if the wilderness had learned to wear our face? In the end, every werewolf story leaves us with the same unanswered question. Not whether the beast existed, but whether anyone could truly tell the difference. Before the moon rose, and that is where our story pauses. Because everything we've explored tonight belongs to legend. The creature, the curse, the transformation, the hunt. But in the next chapter, we leave the folklore behind. We'll open medieval chronicles, trial records, confessions, and eyewitness accounts from people who did not believe they were preserving a myth. They believed they were documenting reality, and whether they were right is a question we'll leave for the next file.